All right, everybody, it's good to see you again. It's Brent Adamson and Karl Schmidt here telling you a little bit more about our forthcoming book, The Framemaking Sale, which will be out in September. We thought we'd dig a little bit deeper in this week and uh, sort of the mechanics of frame making. The book centers around a really powerful finding that the single biggest driver of a high quality, low regret deal that we found in all the research we've been involved in is the degree to which customers are confident in the decision that they're making on behalf of their company. It opens up this really interesting set of questions of what does it mean to design a sales engagement strategy that is very purposefully built to solve for customers' self-confidence. Last time we talked about this idea of the thing that we can do in this environment is like how do we approach customers in such a way that we take something that's big and hard and overwhelming, whether it's complex decisions, whether it's information overload, whether it's aligning objectives across their own colleagues, determining whether or not they'll achieve the outcomes that they're hoping for. All these different challenges. How can we take these questions, these challenges are big and hard and overwhelming, and just make them easier? Put a framework around them such that customers can navigate those waters with greater ease, with higher agency, and just a better sense of we can do this with a higher level of confidence. So last time we talked about sort of framing in a broad sort of abstract sense, or not abstract, but as a broader sense. Today, I want to talk a little bit about frameworks, which is a subset of framing.
And that's where if we think about the difference between framing with and without a framework, the example we're going to go through today is again a pretty simple example, but one where the seller uses a concrete tool that helps structure the customer's thinking.
I would imagine when people read this book, see maybe even just this quick episode of this, again, whatever this is, podcast, they think, well, I think my best people do that already, and to which we would just emphatically say, yes, exactly. That's the whole
100%.
idea,
Yep.
is right. This is exactly what some of the best people are doing already in sales, because and almost instinctively. And by the way, not just in B2B, but in B2C, which is
Yep.
how do I take some of these overwhelming where I just don't feel really certain, and I've talked to someone who says, let me just help you organize your thinking. And Karl, you've got I'll let you run with it. You've got a great example in the consumer side of what this looks like.
Exactly, because as we try to bring this to life in things that people may have experienced in their personal uh, shopping as consumers, a great example of this that we saw, that's pretty universal, is how people shop for engagement rings, for diamond rings. Because again, that's a classic example where there's a good deal of value uncertainty. One of the four main challenges we've seen that undermine customer confidence. And in that world, it can be really overwhelming, because if you're shopping for a diamond ring, as part of an engagement, for the first time, just it all can seem so complex, so difficult to understand. Well, why is this bigger looking diamond less expensive than this seemingly smaller one? There's all these questions about
Oh,
value that kind
100%.
of come up. And that's where, many years ago now, the idea of what they call the four C's of color, clarity, carat, weight, and cut were introduced as the framework to help simplify the valuation of diamonds for engagement ring shoppers. And that framework is so powerful because now a seller can help a customer by saying something like, appreciating working with other customers like you, other first-time ring buyers. It can feel so overwhelming because it feels like there's so much that's unknown. It's so complex. But by focusing on just these four things that are the primary drivers of value, then you as a customer can make trade-offs and decide what's more important. Is it the color? Is it the cut? Is it the size? These trade-offs can now start being made, and it puts more control, a real sense of being able to manage all of this back in the hands of the buyers.
There's 1,000 questions. No, there's not 1,000 questions. There's four. There's ways that you, as an individual supplier, can create validity around your framework, irrespective of what the rest of the industry is doing, whether it's data backed by data, sample size, things like that. But there's also just qualitative ways that you can create validity around your framework. And there's lots of different frameworks you might, it's like, so I need a 4 Cs for my software solution. Not necessarily. There's a number of different frameworks. In fact, there's a whole range, and we've offered some in the book and talked a little bit about it. Here's just a few examples. And I know, Carl's, you've got a background in consulting, right? So
Right,
consulting is an
right.
industry of frameworks, isn't it? It's always been about frameworks in consulting, hasn't it?
No question. That's where as we go through this list, the third one on there, you see the 2x2, and I am a bit of a recovering strategic consultant and spent a number of years at BCG,
Everything's a
which
two
is
by two.
everything's a 2x2 is always the joke. But you see that there's a range from the very simple checklist or a categorization, which is Brent, you were describing, takes what would seem a overwhelmingly large potential list of things that might matter and boil it down to just four, like the four C's, and say, hey, we're going to bound this, as we talked about last time,
Yeah,
where so much of framing is about bounding and prompting. So these are the four things that you really need to focus on. And sometimes amongst those categories might be something that's a bit of a prompt as well that you might not think about on your own. So maybe something like clarity in the diamond might not be something that a first-time buyer would think about as much as some of the other dimensions. But that's a great example of, as we look at what the customer's struggling with, then the framework is designed specifically to add the appropriate bounding as well as prompting to that to, again, help them manage the complexity for themselves. Right? It's
agreed.
not the seller telling them, "Hey, this is the answer." It's giving them a tool that helps them then structure their thinking and then feel in control of the whole decision.
And so these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. And there's all sorts of ways you would use different frameworks for different challenges. So depending on if someone is struggling with decision complexity versus information overload, one might lean into one framework versus another. But they all have in common this idea of taking something that's hard, big, and overwhelming and putting a boundary around it, bounding it, but also prompting is like, here's a couple dimensions you might not have thought about that are really important. And then inside of that, we'll talk about this in future episodes of, again, whatever this is. But nonetheless, leaving degrees of freedom such that the customer's making their own decision of what's best for them. But all of this is in service of this one big idea, which is your single biggest opportunity to drive sales today, as we know from our data, is to help customers feel more confident, not so much in you, but to help them feel more confident in themselves. And what a really cool way to think about customer engagement. We're also now building out the training that goes along with this. And if you'd like to come along on this ride with us even before the book comes out in the fall and be an early adopter, we would love to have you on the early adopter wagon. You could be an OG. I've always wanted to be an OG. This is a great way to be an OG. So shoot us a note on LinkedIn, direct email Brent or Karl at a2binsights.com, which is the name of the company we put around this. And we'll talk soon. Cheers, everybody.